Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual NBC6 Voices on our Facebook and YouTube pages. I'm Jawan Strader. Well, 1 year ago today, George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. His death ignited an international movement and increasing calls for police reform and social justice. Well, the nation, including South Florida, took notice. Some 25 million people have taken part in protests surrounding Floyd's death, making it one of the largest movements in U.S. history. All four officers involved in that fateful day have been charged. Derek Chauvin, the officer who knelt on Floyd's neck, is behind bars awaiting sentencing on second-degree murder charges next month. Now, on the solemn commemoration, the Floyd family spent the day meeting with President Joe Biden. It was their first face-to-face meeting with the president since Floyd's funeral last year. You may remember his 7-year-old daughter, Gianna. Well, she was there too. And when it comes to policing, let's talk about what's changed. So we're joined by Major Craig McQueen. He's retired assistant police chief for the city of Miami. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you, my brother. Well, let's get right to it. Well, Congress has not passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act as President Biden has requested. But what benefits would this legislation have here in South Florida? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, first, I think it'll start all law enforcement to be on the same page. We need to start from those very, very small agencies all the way up to the large agency and make sure everyone is doing the same procedures, have the same rules when it comes to use of deadly force. It's to bring that uniform policing to all agencies. What generally happens when an agency has an issue or something is brought to national attention, that agency makes the change. But we want the whole country to get law enforcement on the same page. For instance, no chokeholds. Chokeholds should be gone. We in the city of Miami, we eliminated chokeholds back in 1994. But the rest of the country didn't move to that point. One of our past chiefs eliminated shooting at moving vehicles. Again, the rest of the country still is not at that point. So I think that will be the biggest thing to get all of law enforcement on the same page.
Well, Major, let's talk about qualified immunity, because we've been hearing a lot of talk about qualified immunity. It's one of the main sticking points preventing Congress from reaching an agreement on police reform. So for all those folks out there who may not know exactly what it is, what is qualified immunity and why is it so important?
Well, think of it this way. Whether it's a law enforcement officer, even someone, when I have to explain to this folks, I always sort of go back to CPR. If you see a person fall down and you perform CPR on them and you crack a rib and to prevent you from being sued, you get that immunity because you're trying to save a life. And so that's what gets a normal person to jump and get involved because they're not worried about being sued. Where the same thing with police officers, there's certain immunity given to police officers for naturally doing the job. Yes, this job has some contact. Yes, there's going to be some encounters that could be on the physical side. But if you're doing it for the right reasons within the guidelines, then you're prohibited. That keeps you from being sued for you doing your job. Now, it does not preclude when criminal acts are done or intentional torts are done. But the police officers do have that luxury there. Now, can they exist without it? I would say it'd be difficult because some actions the police officers have to take, and you don't want them hesitating, and especially if it's to save someone's life. But anything that's involved in criminal activity, then no, there should be no protection for that, and it should never change. There should be no protection for criminal activity. But for instance, if you're in your car and I have to break your window to get you out of that car because it's burning, I don't want you to come sue me because I broke your window. I did that to save your life. So that's part of that immunity that the officers have. And I think it's necessary. That part needs to be there. But we can make sure that when criminal acts are done, there's no safe haven for it. These officers must be held accountable for it. And that was one of the great things about the George Floyd trial. This was the first trial that we've seen in a long time where they started from the very top of that police department and worked their way all the way down to his supervisor to bring in the policies and procedures to see if this officer violated those policies and procedures, which he did.
Well, speaking of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, well, Derek Chauvin is sitting in a prison cell as we speak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what message does that send to police officers, especially here in South Florida?
Well, I've been saying this since the day that George Floyd was tragically killed in front of all of our eyes, that all agencies, not just for this trial, for this officer that's been held accountable for, it should have started the day of this incident. Police departments all over Dade County and well, the tri-counties as well, Juan, they should be looking at their procedures, their deadly force policy, their training, make sure officers know when to, or what part of the body that they can actually apply pressure to, when to de-escalate. All these things should have been put in place. But the most critical part of this thing is that police officers should see when you're wrong and you do it with malice and the intent that this officer demonstrated, you will be held accountable. And it's needed in police work. Trust me, it's needed in police work because we have the only job that where you can be the judge, executioner, and the jury at the same time. So we need that high accountability. And this officer is paying that accountability level. And I think that's critical for all officers to realize that, yeah, you have a job to do, but let's not be malice. Let's not just actually think you're above the law. And that's what I saw every time I watched that video, and it really angered me when I watched the video. And you can see these are normal people pleading with this officer to stop. And he wouldn't stop because he thought he was above the law. So hopefully that message is out to everyone. You're not above the law. You have to answer to the law, but do your job. Nobody's not telling you to do it. I can guarantee you, there's no place here that would say that they don't want the police anymore, because we all know when you're down 911, you don't want to wait to see your doctor come out there or see a reporter come out there. You want your police to come, but they want to be treated fairly. And that's all it's all about, Duane. That's all. Just be treated fairly. Treat people the way you want to be treated, period.
And you know, it's been 1 year. So NBC6 caught up with Broward Sheriff Gregory Tony about what's changed in the last year since George Floyd was killed.
Right.
Here's what he had to say.
Okay.
We have made an enormous amount of adjustments internally when it comes to police reform, accountability, and reallocating funding. There was a lot of discussion after the George Floyd murder about defunding the police. And one of the things that I communicated back to the public was, it's not a matter of defunding, but a matter of reallocating. And so for us, what that looked like was, from an accountability standpoint, we put in more checks and balances to ensure that we didn't have law enforcement out there that were abusing their authorities, hurt, harming, or even killing someone out there.
And is how would you describe relations between South Florida police officers and the Black community?
Well, I happen to have a deep history with the citizens of Miami. I joined the police department in 1981 when we were having riots every even year. And it took all of those years for us to build a trust back into the community. We did that by going block to block, getting out of those police cars, meeting with folks, letting them also be involved in the type of policing that they need in their area, and letting the people know that we are human too and that we're here to serve them. See, that's the biggest issue. You get a lot of these police officers think that the people work for them. No, it's the other way around. You work for the people. And you should always remember that your biggest customer is your citizens, that business community, and those visitors that come into your city, and they must be treated that way. And when you treat people that way, you have no issue. Yes, policing throughout its history has had a horrible reputation within the Black community, because, as you know, the original police officers were Klansmen and militia people who was only job was just to try to hurt and to control Black people. So it took a while to build that relationship. So yes, we have a better relationship than what they have around the country. But that's all because what happened in the 80s and all the hard work we put in. And when I tell you, I used to go with the calls and people used to close the door in our face at doing some of those 80 rides. And we had to keep coming back to those doors and say, look, that was that one incident. We serve you. Let me show you what your police department can do. So a lot of work went into it. So yes, the citizens here in South Florida have a better relationship, because you can see what's happening around the country. Some of these departments, you can tell they have zero community relations. And this is critical, and that's what's needed now. Officers now need to be outside of their cars, walking, talking to citizens, going to community groups, going to all the local churches and civil rights groups and social groups and fraternities and sororities. They need to be spending time with them. Now's the time to really build those bonds. So South Florida is a little bit ahead, and but it can fall back if they don't pay attention to what's going on.
And, you know, in the last year, Fort Lauderdale, we saw a Black woman, a protester, shot in the face with a rubber bullet. We've had countless of unsolved shootings throughout our area as well. Do you think Black people in South Florida trust police?
Yes, we have a better relationship there's a love-hate relationship with the police. Let's be honest about that. I always tell folks, police are like the dentist. You see them, you don't need them until you need them. Just like with your dentist, you don't just come to your dentist until you need them. So yes, one of the things that helped us was the transparency. After shootings took place, we started doing 72 hours review with the family, the clergy, and civil rights groups, and had them come in and see what happened at that shooting. That really helped us. And this is another one of those reforms that police departments should be doing. They should be doing those reviews with the family, the reviews with the civil rights groups and the community groups, and even with the media. Do those reviews. Say, this is what happened on this case. And by doing that, you open that wall of transparency so everybody can say, yes, the police was right on this issue. And that's what you want. You want people to feel comfortable and be able to say they have that relationship, but you got to do it. You can't just drive around in the car with the windows rolled up and waving. No, you got to get out of that car. So yes, there is that distrust. It's been there from what happened in the past, and we still have to constantly continue to break down those walls. And that was one thing I can say proudly what we were doing in the city. We were really breaking down those walls because it's necessary. Unfortunately, the most unsolved crime for a police department is black on black crime. It's called people not talking. So we have to break those walls to get people to talk. But it's going to take courage. Get out of that car. Let's meet. Let's talk. And let's do what we're supposed to do, protecting our largest client, which is our citizens.
And Major, I'm going to have you adjust your shot real fast. I want you to adjust your shot.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, I want to get to the new chief of Miami, Art Acevedo. Miami has a new police chief, Art Acevedo. He's
that I would support.
already making some high-profile staffing changes as
Yes.
well. So how do you think he's doing so far?
I think he's doing a good job. Each chief must come in and take a true internal audit of the police department. They have to see what's there, have to see what's pending, what was left. And then that chief needs to put out his or her policies, the way they're going to guide that police department. Chief Acevedo has come in, and the first thing he said that he has no room for officers who would tarnish the badge. And as you see, he's already making those changes. Even at the high staff level, he made some of those changes, and it's necessary. Because the last thing any chief wants to do, if I was taking over an apartment, the last thing I want to do is continuation of something that should have been fixed. So I think he's doing a good job. He has a huge task in front of him. Anytime you come in from the outside, you have to start to show and to build trust with the men and women. But you also gotta make sure that everyone is following the rules. And I think that's what he's setting now. He's setting that tone. Follow the rules. You'll be okay. If you don't follow the rules, I have no room for you. You will be removed. And that's one of Chief Acevedo's reputation, as to remove bad officers. And you break that code of silence, or that code of blue, when you do that. Because I can tell you point blank, there's tons of great police officers out there who don't want bad police officers around them. They don't want it. But if the top is not doing what they're supposed to do, these guys are allowed to linger and fester, and they keep tarnishing the badge. They need to go. Law enforcement is a great profession, is a noble profession, but we need people in there that's not going to tarnish the badge. And so I believe that's what Art is doing at this time. Chief Acevedo is what he's doing.
And speaking of Chief Art Acevedo, he took the time to speak to NBC6 about the death of George Floyd, because people want to know what he thinks about how things are going, how he sees the case changing policing, and what does he want to see come out of it. This is what he had to say.
Okay.
Well, I think that what the death of George Floyd did, it was a great awakening for all of America. For the first time, seeing that man sit there for 9 minutes and 46 seconds, pleading for his life, saying he can't breathe, calling out for his mom. I think that it was a slap in the face of Americans that necessarily aren't African Americans, Americans that didn't look like George Floyd. It led to things that I never would have imagined. It humanized maybe what Kaepernick was doing when he was taking a knee. And the NFL, the NBA, NHL, NASCAR finally started acknowledging the pain of the African American community and communities of color. And so I think it is a watershed moment. And I think because of his death, we're going to see policing that's not as broken as our critics would have you believe, but policing do better, be better, and be more reflective of the values of all segments of our society.
Now, Chief Acevedo went on to describe specific reforms that he would like to see in the city of Miami. Here's what he had to say.
We're starting to see there's 18,000 police departments in this country, and the vast majority are not huge departments like Miami PD or Houston or LA or New York. They're 10, 15, 20 officer departments. And what happens in Ferguson and the way that that department was treating communities of color, a community that was predominantly African American. What happens anywhere in this country doesn't happen in a vacuum. It impacts the entire profession. And so what we're seeing is that we're seeing a movement to have more in terms of uniform policies as it relates to use of force, as it relates to chokeholds and banning chokeholds, and requirements that officers not only intervene in what is a misconduct, but actually report the misconduct. And more departments are being required to do that and adopt these policies. I think it's a win for the American people, and it's a win for the vast majority of police officers that are honorable, dedicated professionals and deserve systems, process, policies in place that helps weed out the bad ones.
So what do you think about what he said there about weeding out the bad ones?
Oh, yeah. Well, hearing it actually come from his mouth, I've heard a lot about Chief Acevedo. That would make me want to come out of retirement and work with him, because he is demonstrating something that I was pushing hard and constantly before I left. For instance, you should go to any police station and you want to write a complaint against a police officer. You should be given a form and say, okay, number one, you can write a report and have a sergeant meet you now, or you can go to internal affairs, or the internal affairs can come to you. People should feel comfortable going when they need to make a complaint on a police officer and not shying away. But as he stated, 95% of all police departments in this country is 200 men and women or less. 200 men and women or less. There's very few departments that's 500, 1,300, 10,000, and 20,000 or 40,000. There's very few of those. But majority of them are 200 men or less. And some, as he stated, 10 officers. See, when we talk about defunding is a bad word that people want to use because they're actually taken away from the issue. It should be reforming. Make sure that every police department is operating the same, whether it's 10 officers or 40,000. They can still operate the same. Their use of force policy should be the same. For instance, have you ever been actually told a department's use of force policy?
No.
Why not?
That's a good question.
Shouldn't the citizens know what the
use of force policy should?
It would make sense, right? Because if we say this is what could happen to you if you do this, now wouldn't the citizens say, "Well, I won't do that," if that know what would happen to you? So it's no excuse for departments not to share their deadly force policy. And this was something that I was arguing with a few of the police chiefs that I worked with before when we had incidents here in Miami. Excuse me. I said, let's show the people the policy. Let's discuss it. Let's go to the churches. Let's go to the schools. Let's go to where the teenagers hang out. Let's give them everything they need to be successful. So that way we don't have these incidents. And you have some chiefs that are afraid to do that. And it makes no sense to me because we work for the citizens. So hearing what Chief Acevedo said was that it's a chance now for the police departments to get in one. Because as I stated to you, most of the police officers on the job want to do a good job. They love the job. They love the respect that the job brings. They don't want it to be tarnished, because I can tell you point blank, what happened in Minnesota affects Miami. What happened in Miami affects Washington, D.C. We have the only profession that when a police officer does something, it affects the whole law enforcement community. So it is embarrassing. And I can tell you wholeheartedly, I didn't talk to one police officer that thought what happened to George Floyd was right. Not one. And I talked to thousands, and they all felt the same way, that this is wrong, this is embarrassment, and this officer need to be punished for what he did. And then for us as African Americans, it brought back some ill wills toward law enforcement, because we actually saw a man get murdered right in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, see, if you go back to Rodney King was one of those flashpoints where people saw 6 police officers beating on one guy. and you go, well, no matter what Rodney King did, it looks horrible when you see 6 people beating on one guy, and then your final word is, oh, we wanted him to put his hand behind his back, so you had to just continue to hit him. So that is the kind of image that made people think. George Floyd, unfortunately, his image is the one that's bringing police departments to the forefront, and it's something that should have been done without someone dying. So we need reform. It needs to come from the Department of Justice, and it works to every police department. And that's how this should work. Forget defunding. You can always throw defunding in saying, we're going to provide training. If you don't abide by this training, then the funding that you get to buy equipment, the funding that you get to hire officers will be removed. And that's what the process should be. And make sure that when we put these deadly force policies in place, that they're shared. If I gave you the deadly force policy of the City of Miami Police Department, you would go, oh, I didn't know that. Now I know. So I will avoid that. And then this is something we can share with the young people, your young drivers, the young people that's out there who thinking that it's okay to do certain things. They need to know. So let's not hide it. I mean, we protect the people. That's what the job is all about.
It sure is. No, thank you so much. Former Assistant Chief McQueen, thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. You already know that. And I think now is the time for police departments to take that step. It's time for us to be brutally honest. Let's fix those issues that we have. Let's make sure everybody understand. And an encounter with a police officer shouldn't always end up deadly. And I encourage everybody, let's survive the encounter. But it has to be on both sides as well. One from the citizen and one from the police officers. And knowledge is the key to that. When we share the knowledge, then everybody can be successful. But we have to share the knowledge. We can't hide it. And I really appreciate this forum. I really appreciate what you're doing. Keep pushing out the message. And whenever you need me, just call.
You got that right. I most definitely will. Assistant Chief Craig McQueen, thank you so much again, brother. Always insightful. And I learn something every time we have you on. I really appreciate you.
No problem. Anytime.
You got it.
Be safe.
Thank you. You too. And that's our time for now for tonight. You can watch this program this Saturday morning on NBC6 at 9:00 a.m. We will also have the latest on the Biden administration's granting of TPS for Haitian immigrants. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Again, if you have a story idea, let me know. Be sure to inbox me. I'm at Jawan NBC6. And thank you. And before we go, remember, education is the key to success. If you believe, you will succeed. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.